Well, Mr. Binks is in here today for this blog, as you can see. He's decided to have a big, huge chinwag. Is that right, old man? Yeah, it's right there. Yeah? I thought you would agree. I think I'm going to go on about sicknesses. This is a blog that I just got to take once, and I think, and that's it. I was born adopted. So my birth mother was Karen. My birth father was Jack, who I just found out at the start of the year. Thanks, Mr. Binks. Yes, that's me in there. That's me. You can say hello. There we go. When I was born, Karen gave birth to me. Karen didn't actually get to see me. I was taken away, and I think in like an orphanage type of thing with Mission of St. James and St. John for 3 months because I couldn't keep in food, etc., etc. I found out later that I've even had a bit of surgery down under with something that didn't grow properly, so I was sort of partly intersexed, and there's sort of scars anyway. So I was eccentric from very, very young, and I think Mum and Dad did something really smart, is they didn't sort of stamp it as autism, which I did in 1990-91, got stamped with autism. They just saw me as eccentric. When it comes to more severe parts of when the illnesses started, besides autism, I used to be told in high school that I was looking out the windows writing a symphony, and I actually sort of was, but I was actually having mild partial seizures or petit mals at the time, and I didn't click up with a lot of the classes, which was part of autism as well. And one day in year 11, in the summer holidays, I went riding my bike. It was about 43 degrees. And the next thing I know, I was in intensive care in the Wodonga Hospital. I had a seizure on the bike, and I had fallen on the ground, a little tiny mountain, a little tiny hill, I should say, just outside of Tangam. And I was unconscious for a long time, and I flatlined, which was a fascinating experience, actually going through the tunnel, which I sort of still remember. But I actually pulled my drip out and everything else there because I didn't really understand what had happened. I'd had a typical seizure and lost it in my pants and everything else there. What happened next is that I saw a neurologist in Albury, and I got diagnosed with epilepsy, which was absolutely huge for me. I didn't tell anybody. I got first put on Dilantin, which is probably one of the oldest anticonvulsants, and it doped me out a fair bit. The school got told, but I didn't tell anyone at all. It was really interesting in one of the classes in year 11, towards the end, I think it was Nikki Webb, having an argument on abortion. And she said if I knew my baby was going to be epileptic, I'd kill them before they were born. And that really got me even more zipped up not to say a word about it. That got pretty bad. In 89, I got work with Church Scene, an Anglican newspaper in Melbourne. And I was basically a clerk, a geek doing databasing. And towards the end of that, my epilepsy got so bad, I was having sometimes 1 to 2 seizures a day. I was on Epilum. I pumped up Epilum so much, and I had Dr. King it was part of Bethesda, Epworth, who was my neurologist. He was a very good doctor. So I had to quit work at the start of January in 1990, and I had to go home to Mum and Dad because I was very sick and I was having so many seizures. Mum and Dad were really smart, is that because they couldn't necessarily get me an appointment for Royal Melbourne, Dr. King suggested that we just go inside emergency, even fake a seizure, which I didn't. I actually had a seizure in the emergency section. I got put straight into 4 North, which was the neuro at the time, the ward, and I bumped up with a bunch of neurologists, and they, of course, wouldn't believe me, so they put me on video telemetry, and I had a seizure, and it showed up on the EEG and all the rest of it. Now, sitting in having a waffling discussion with Mum and Dad and myself, and I said, how about an MRI? Don't ask me how I knew about an MRI at the time, but I did. and they were going, oh, just to shut them up or go and give them an MRI. And they found that I had a tumour, an astrocytoma, and I hadn't had a growing left temporal lobe, because the left temporal lobe had probably stopped growing around high school or even early primary school to stop growing. So it was, oh, you've got brain cancer. We need to check this out. So in 1990, I had brain surgery, and it was the change of my entire life. I still remember coming out of brain surgery. I was in a lot of pain, and I was in their, what do you call it again? Intensive care. I think it was 4 East. And I was in a hell of a lot of pain. And I actually remember having an Irish nurse there. And she said, "You think you're in pain? There's people around the world who are a lot more pain than you are." And I said, "Show me." But what happened then is when I got put back into the room after about 2 days in intensive care, everything was further away from me. I had become inside me, if it makes any sense, and everyone else was like a 3D television around me. Things were distant. Still to this day, I can see inside me, or I know me inside, and it's seriously looking like I'm looking at a whole hologram outside, which is pretty trippy. And that was what, when the left temporal lobe came out, I had a problem walking for about 6 months. Went back to mum and dad's, and I had 1.5 this side, 1.5 heads. Look at the scars all there. Really swollen. My brother freaked out because he used to go, "Look at this, I can put my finger in my brain." He freaked out a bit over that. But it was a really trippy experience. I had to learn at home how to walk. My brain turned off about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I was non-verbal. That was when I went back to mum and dad. I learned what aphasia was very, very early. Aphasia was trippy. And what actually happened is that I was a bit wacko. I used to, when my head stopped swelling, I lost it. My mood swung up and down like a pork chop. And one of the problems was one day I walked off so many kilometres up the road. I just had no idea where I was. And it was one day I had a church service where Dad was, they were praying for me at night. And it's probably the second time in my life that I saw Dad cry. He was beyond him. He was just crying in the church, which Dad just never did that. It's like Dad swearing, he just didn't. And what happened, they went back to Dr. King, and I was moved to a rehabilitation. It was a transitional living centre in Thornbury, and it was run by Bethesda, which was run by the Salvos, which was part of the Epworth ABI TBI rehab. And I was in there for nearly 2 years. And it seemed a very, very long time, and it was very, very trippy. It was transitional living. It was one of what is normal now with the NDIS, but in those days it was revolutionary. And what was fun in the rehab is we had a credit card with unlimited access. So what we could do is when the 4 of us, there was 4 in one home, and there were 4 separate units. And you sort of had to earn to get into the unit. But we basically got so much chocolate and so many nibble bits and everything from the supermarket. I went and had a psychologist. A bit of the whole timeline here, the psychologist that I had in Bethesda, which was in Richmond, was the first time I told someone about child sexual abuse. Different things those days, but she did nothing about it. But what ended up happening is I ended up starting my first disability workshops. There was a group in Hawthorn, I think it was Hawthorn Community Education Centre or something rather like that. And I started up a group there called Changing Directions. There was another person who was a welfare worker. And I ran that for over a year, and we wrote music and did this, and it was just me running what was my first disability workshops. And I really enjoyed that. One day that was trippy though was we all got called in. We got free taxi rides there, and the person who was running it, one of the main people in the group, had suicided in front of a train. And it was really trippy going to his funeral when his mother was more relieved than sad that he had suicided because he was under a lot of mental health pain. That was trippy. After a while, I ended up getting into a unit there, and I had friends like Sophie. Robin was just extraordinary. She came to visit me a lot of times. Had my friend Sean pop in with a 909 drum machine and other stuff, which was fantastic. Had my friend Simon pop in. It was really lovely. Mum and Dad popped in here and there. And what happened is my autism and my mental health took over, and I spent days, sort of most of the day I was stimming, and I was in a meltdown, absolute meltdown, no communication, and I just stimmed and stimmed and stimmed and stimmed and stimmed. I've been in hospital before in Royal Melbourne for a few months about what in the hell was these seizures, and I was on video telemetry for I think over 2 months. My head was super glued and it didn't show anything. So I ended up being too crook for rehab, and I went home to Mum and Dad. But I ended up then a few months later, I think this was 91 or so, end of 91, I went to the Austin Hospital and met who is now Professor Samuel Berkovic, an absolute genius at epilepsy. I don't know if I had electroconvulsive therapy. Some parts of me think I did. I don't know because I can't remember it. But he came up with the most genius idea, which I found out in 2000 from a neurologist. He wrote down in the papers and probably told Mum and Dad that I had autism. And that was, for someone like that, Asperger's was found out in the early 90s. I mean, the earlier, it was about 96, 97, around there. And this doctor had already surpassed what Hans Asperger's did and diagnosed me with autism. What happened is I went back home, and I was, after a few months living with Mum and Dad in the summer, it was too bloody hot. Mum and Dad, when my head got, one of the problems with the brain surgery I had is that my part cooling down my head didn't work anymore, and I got boiling hot in my head, which I still do today. Look, it's winter now, and I don't have to put on a hat or anything because my head is very hot still. Mum and Dad used to drive me down to the Hume Weir, and not literally, but I went pushed inside the water just to cool myself down. So what happened is I had a psych nurse in Wodonga who was one of the best I've ever had. He just didn't put up with any shit. He was really just confronting, a lovely guy, but he just stabbed you in the face right on. And he said, you've got to get out of your parents' place, you've got to live independently. You know, see the world, fight it. And I found a lovely friend, Michelle, who I still talk to today. I read about her every day on Facebook. My friend Michelle and I moved into a flat for the first time independently. It was Michelle and I. And yeah, I'll go later, but that's the story from there. When it comes, so I'm just going on about health. What happened is my ABI and epilepsy went. I just had very mild seizures occasionally. I was still on Tegretol, but what I couldn't deal with was my ABI, is that I had a shocking memory about things, and it was mainly, I started up with uni with La Trobe doing welfare. I did arts, I did another thing of welfare, I did all of these different TAFE and uni courses, but my big problem was acronyms and names. I couldn't remember them. And one of the courses, this is just to do with my health, it was La Trobe welfare, is that one of the lecturers pulled me up, Dr. Yada Yada Yada, and she said, this is a really, really good assignment. You know, this is straight A's, if this was the question. Because I didn't understand the question and the acronyms in the question, I literally totally messed up on the assignment. So I couldn't study in that course. We started off with about 60, 70 people and ended up with about 20. So typical me, let's try another type of course or degree. And I had that problem for about 13 years of doing course, not understanding course, doing course, and it was not that I didn't understand. I understood the maths of it, but I didn't understand the acronyms and the wording of it, and I took everything literally. So it was still 2000 that I found out about that I had autism, but back then I didn't even know I had autism. So anyway, what my problem was after brain surgery is I had migraines and headaches. I had pain in my neck, I had pain behind my eye and a pain in my left side. Still do, nothing's changed. And in 2000, I saw a neurologist in one of the hospitals, and they looked at my previous records and said, yes, you're autistic, which opened my eyes up, and he explained what my left temporal lobe did do and what I can't do now because there isn't one. And he was fascinating. It really opened up my eyes that I had autism, and I found a group called Alpha, which are in St Kilda, and that was a group for people with autism, in those days Asperger's, to get themselves into work, to get themselves organised, to get themselves aligned and everything else there. I went and did an IQ test there and scored one of the highest, and I went and did another IQ test, and it was the highest that they've ever seen. I actually finished the entire book of an IQ test. Different now. And they went, wow, you have amazing abilities. I was living in Melbourne, then Hoppers then, and I wanted work. They gave me work in the Werribee Plaza as a pianist, which I took for years, which was so incredibly cool. With health, my migraines were getting just as bad. I was having Panadeine Forte mainly for those, but I was very strict on the Panadeine Forte. I had a lot of work writing music. It was after a while came into Club Wild, which I did for 11 years and wrote a lot of music there. And what happened even then is in the afternoons I had to have a bit of a kip for about an hour or 2 hours. Sometimes it was underneath tables, sometimes it was here, there and everywhere when touring or doing workshops. Then my brain woke up again, which I've still sort of got that today. I'm going to zoom all of that, besides things like basal cell carcinomas and all the rest of it, and the mental health, and I'll go straight to 2019. Chloe and I moved to Ballarat, and I knew something was really wrong with my body. I had lumps here, there, and lumps there, and I had no energy, and my nose started bleeding nearly every day, and everything else was just so wrong, and I didn't want to eat. So I said to the doctor I had, I said, I think I've got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma or something like that. So she got me tested I got a test in my knee under there, and I got tested under my armpit, and they said, yeah. She rang me up one morning about like 7:30, can you come around? So I went to her practice, and she said, yeah, sorry to tell you this, but you've got leukemia. And it was it took me weeks, I think, to understand, to try and figure that out. I was really blown away. So I had Dr. Chong, who I still have now. Dr. Chong said, you've got all over your body, which I think in leukemia terms is stage 5, which means all over your body, which means it's in your bloodstream everywhere. And my lymph glands had got to my spleen, which then goes to your liver, which is a big problem. And in a few weeks, he got me to have chemo, bendamustine and rituximab as a target. And that's when you feel really sick. Chemo is another level. What was trippy about this is when I started this it was about February, April of 2000, COVID had hit. What was even more trippy is I had my first chemo and I had a workshop in Arthur, and I collapsed and fell on the floor. I was not unconscious, but I collapsed, and it was the second day of chemo. I had my port in, and I had no energy. I was really, really sick. So, funny enough, the week after that, we closed down all of the workshops, and I ran 3 workshops online, which was trippy right through COVID, and it was like about over half a year until we were allowed to come back. And in that meantime, while I was home, we had COVID, which we had a fear of because COVID would kill me at the time. And I was on chemo and still running the workshops, which was just out there. So when I finished the chemo, it was getting close. A few months I was going to be 50, but about a week after chemo finished, I got the shingles, and I got the shingles really bad. So it's all over there, all over my back of my neck, right up here. It's got photos of it, and it looks incredibly bad. My shingles was really, really, really bad, and the pain was the worst pain I'd felt in my life. Chloe didn't know what it was. I didn't know what it was. So I ended up going to the hospital twice. One, they kept me overnight and put me on antivirals, and everyone was on full clothing, masks and everything with COVID, full PPE. And they put me on one of the worst drugs. They put me on, what is it called again? Starts with L. Put me on Lyrica, which is the drug from hell, and they put me on 600, which is incredibly high, and that is 5 years ago, and I still haven't got off it. Anyway, besides that, the Lyrica actually got rid of a lot of the pain. The shingles actually went down, and I turned 50. And what happened in December is, and before that, is I realised that my body was not well. I'd just been diagnosed with diabetes, which was sort of going through chemo, and I had arthritis, and I had lots of these other things that were just not quite right, and it took me a long time to get off chemo. I was on a lot of medication, and I kept on going back to the oncologist and saying, is it this, is it this, is it this? And he gaslighted me. Still to this day, he still gaslights. But I was sort of saying to him, why didn't you put me on antivirals while I was having chemo to stop shingles and all of this other stuff there? And my lymphocytes were 0. My white blood cells were about 100 instead of like now they're 9,600. And they were everything. I was so incredibly immune compromised for about a year. And I was on the antivirals for shingles for years and years and years, which was pretty trippy. So there's all of that stuff. What happened after that and through that, I realised that my brain was not operating as it used to. Names were a lot harder, and I was becoming very vague, and a lot of my emotions were just really not there. I could still write and I could still compose, but something was wrong there. And it was annoying Dr. Chong, annoying other doctors constantly of what in the hell is wrong with me. So I had PET scans, MRIs, CT scans, and all these other scans. You've got another doctor specialist diagnosed me with A, B, C, D, E, F fibromyalgia, and another 5 types of arthritis. And I was on a walking stick. I ended up then getting a walker because my legs weren't working properly. And it was only this year that last year I got Dr. Kramer, who's a neurologist, got me to go and have a brain scan. And they found out that some of my memory was deteriorating. And some of it was extremely bad with parts of my memory. My IQ was, above normal, but the rest was dropping. And it was only this year that a foot doctor, said, you've got Parkinson's. You've got Parkinson's feet, Parkinson's this, Parkinson's that. And that wasn't that long ago. And I ended up going to another neurologist, and she put me on, what's it called? Anyway, the drugs that you use for giving your brain dopamine. And that changed things. It makes you feel very sick, but I found out that a lot of the jerking around my arms and my legs, some of it I've had for over 10 years, calmed down a bit. And the tremors calmed down, but somehow the Parkinson's was building up, and somehow I noticed that my brain was becoming vague. And with the aphasia, for the first time in the last few months, I had global aphasia, so I couldn't understand sometimes people talking to me. It was just gibberish. I went, oh, this isn't good. And I had workshops where I ran the workshop but had no idea where I was or who the people were. I thought, oh shit. So I had the neurologist last year, and this year another neurologist, she's really good, has put me on to get another exam from a cognitive neurologist who's a professor to actually measure this year to last year to how much my neuro degeneration slash dementia is going, what the speed is. She sort of popped me in as having Parkinson's, and probably stage 2 to stage 3 of Parkinson's. I just finally got it diagnosed. And now the whole big drama is I realise that the time is ticking, and with starting the medication for Parkinson's is that it sort of speeds up or gives a bit of a kick. She believes that my brain is incredibly complicated, that it's from domestic abuse, it's from head injuries, a lot of it's from chemo. Because I had such a big hole in the part of my brain, it triggered off the glial cells, and the glial cells are becoming big and fat and dying over the top of the astes, which is on top of the neurons, and it's growing big time. And that's the dementia slowly putting its feet and squashing and killing different neurons in part of my brain. So I've noticed my speech isn't good. It's getting worse. My memory is getting worse, and things are sometimes getting difficult at night and sundown. I got no idea where I am, and I just wobble around. Sometimes put the iPad in the fridge, things like that. So I noticed that all of this is happening. So I'm sort of telling myself this is the line of how all of this came. There's other disabilities there as well, but these are the two that are going to be very difficult, which you're dealing with at the moment. But I am still working, even though I've got these disabilities. I've got the support, and I keep on going, and I'm a fighter. I've been through so much crap in my life, and with so many different illnesses and the rest of it, I fight it, and I don't try to label it. I just go, all right, yeah, bring it on. And I think that's the whole thing for you, if you're ever watching this again, is, you know, don't let the bastards get you down. Don't let the stupid system get you down. And the doctors, don't let the disease get you down. Fight it. Because your brain still has a lot to do. And with neuroplasticity, there's a lot that you can actually retrain and redo, especially in your right temporal lobe. And don't give up. Fight the system and fight the diseases, and don't let them take over. Leukemia's got a few years until trisomy 12. I'm going to need target at home. I'm probably never going to have chemo with that. My colon, whatever happens, when it ever happens. So I've got all of these things, and it's like I'm fighting a timeline. But sometimes I just let it go, because I think that the stress of worrying is not healthy upon cancer. It's a lot better not to worry about all of it. And just, and just live life, every moment of it. If it's difficulty, we'll try it again tomorrow. Hang in there, and don't let the bastards get you down.